Lloyd, thank you. My son did these experiments in my basement. We even had a Bunsen burner for him. We were lucky we still had it house. My wife and I joined this church in 1953. I was out of college 2 years, and we moved to Edwardsville. And we've been associated with this church ever since. Now, when we joined, it was on North Kansas, right across the street from Saxton's Funeral Home. Originally, it was LloydSchwarz15March2015 Funeral Home. And then it was Mike Material's Funeral Home. And now it's Saxton's Funeral Home. And we had a problem. We didn't have any parking. But we had a second problem. From the sidewalk to the landing to go in the door, there was 10 steps. And believe me, you didn't want to be a pallbearer in one of those services, because that was a load. But the real problem was we had no parking. And down the block, 4 houses down, 4 buildings down, was a Presbyterian church. They didn't have much parking either. So 55 years ago, the congregation bought this property. Now, we didn't build right away. We sold that church to another church, and that church sold it to a family who lived there in that church. Now, some of the people had an opportunity a few years ago to go through that church to see what that family had done with it. But I was not one of the lucky ones that got to go through. But we weren't the only church that had a problem. Presbyterian Church is still there, 55 years later. But they now own a piece of property east of Edwardsville, and they're planning on building there. Now, the First Baptist Church was on St. Louis Street. They had a parking problem. Theirs was later helped. An A&W Whitmer stand was across the street to the west, and they bought that property and made it parking. They also bought some other property, but then Flores Mutual, now called Horticulture, just east of town, built a building there. The building, and they later sold it to build the other side of the interstate, and the county later bought the problem, and it's now the criminal court. And they had some parking. So First Baptist got to share that parking with the county court. So that helped. St. John's Methodist Church was right to the west of the courthouse downtown. And they didn't have any parking. Across the street from them had been an automobile dealership that none of you know the history of, but it was notorious. People would give him $1,000 to deliver a car, and he had hundreds of people giving him $1,000, and he really wasn't delivering cars. He was buying cars and paying more for them than what he was selling them for. And that little scheme folded. Eaton had the Methodist Church bought Burns Nursery off of 143, and they have made a beautiful church there. They have a little lake in front, but they have ample parking and plenty of room to expand. Eden Church on North 2nd Street bought the whole block to the east of it, tore everything down, and made it a parking lot. And then they bought the building to the north of that lot, which had been a dairy and a restaurant. And that now is the community center. It used to be the senior center. But they bought that property to have additional parking. So every church that was in the downtown area all had the same problem, parking. Now, this church looked to the future 55 years ago when they built this lot, bought this lot. And then, when we sold that building, we met for a little while in the grade school. It was just North Presbyterian Church. And we used that facility until that building over there was built. it was our sanctuary and fellowship hall. Now, we later, and when this building was being built, we later added that stop parking lot, which helped us. But we needed room for further expansion and to do other things. And that's why the lot on the corner of here was purchased. Now, that probably isn't going to solve our final problem, but it's a step that's important that we're taking. Now, without this second service, this congregation would have been dead. All of us in the first service were getting older, and I was on the search committee that hired James, and my wife was the chairman of the board. And what we wanted was a contemporary service. And we've been very proud and very pleased with what has been done with you people. And at Christmas time, the that was put together, I thought it was wonderful to see all of those children here. And without James, that probably would not have happened. And the leadership that's coming from your group is wonderful. We're pleased and happy to see what is happening here. So the point is, we had a problem, and we solved that part of the problem. But when you solve one problem, another one generally pops up. So we're solving that now. And so what this is all about, we had a vote. We had a congregational meeting before, after each service. And at the first service, there was 2 votes against buying the property. But the contemporary service voted unanimously. But I'll tell you something. In that early service, we have always had 2 votes against everything. and Ron Everhart was in the back in the choir, and he and I both know that one of those no votes was his grandfather. This morning I told the other story. When we put the first unit up, Ron's father was the chairman of the building committee. And they put the cornerstone in upside down. Now you write 1961 down, and you flip it over. It's still 1961. But Ron spotted it, and if you want to know how he spotted it, ask him sometime how he was smart enough as a young kid to know. I know, but I'm not going to tell you. Okay. Now, the important thing is that a church, without a plan, knowing where they want to go, is a church that's going to go nowhere. This congregation has had a planning group that has been planning out for the next 10 years. So they're looking to the future. Now, we looked at the future 5 years ago and bought this property. And we're about to outgrow it. And we want to be prepared so that this church stays alive and vibrant from here on in. So you're going to be asked next Sunday to fill out a pledge to consider helping you pay for it.